Okay, welcome to another Ginger Mathematician video. I thought I'd take the opportunity to go through my round 4 game against Martin Halbro. If you have a look at the thumbnail, you'll see he's rated 2350-ish and an international master, and this is one of my best wins ever. So I thought I'd share it with you, and maybe you can get a few tricks on how to beat an international master. So I've uploaded the game to Chess Study, which is a very useful tool, and I'm just going to talk through my thoughts first of all, how I thought about the game, what kind of ideas I was thinking about, maybe some ideas that you can take into your own games as well, or maybe you're just interested to see how to beat a professional chess player. That's also interesting too. So I was black, so I don't get the first move. My opponent gets the first move and plays e4. As Bobby Fischer always said, best by test. And I played d5. So I tend to play the Scandinavian. I can't remember the last time I've lost in a Scandinavian game. I tend to get quite a few draws, but this is a nice win that I'll definitely add to my collection. So the main move is simply to just take the pawn. And the queen comes out early, which generally speaking, in opening principles, is a bad idea. But at the same time, this queen can be quite useful, and it doesn't lose too much of a tempo, and white loses a pawn in the centre. So it's a reasonable idea. Knight c3 by my opponent, so attacking the queen, and I bring it straight back to d8. So this is what I specialise in. You could also play the queen to a5. You could also play it to d6 as well. So the good thing about this is if maybe one of my opponents prepare, I can then switch to one of the other moves. But I prefer d8. It's, in my opinion, quite straightforward in terms of plans. So d4, put a pawn in the centre, allow the bishop to come out. And I play knight f6, bring your knights out. And then my opponent played knight f3, normal move, get your knights out. And my idea for this game was to play bishop g4, which seems a normal developing move. And after h3, my idea is to take the knight. One of the biggest things in chess is the imbalance between the bishop and the knight. And I've created a fundamental imbalance for the rest of the game, which is I have lost my bishop pair. Notice my opponent has 2 bishops. I only have 1 bishop, which generally is better for white. However, I have a very specific idea in mind, and it gives me a very solid position. And what I do is I set my pawns. My first pawn comes to c6 to stop queen takes b7. And after knight e2, which is a good move because often white wants to ram this idea down black's throat. And then I play my pawn to e6. So because I lost my light square bishop, I no longer have this bishop. I'm going to try and put as many of my pawns on light squares to limit this bishop. And that's my general plan. And if I can exchange the dark square bishops, then white won't have the bishop pair. So one of my strategies, which you'll see later on, is to try and exchange this dark square bishop off, if possible. Now, white played an interesting move here, which I hadn't encountered before, which was g4, which to my mind seems a bit premature. I think it's better to try and get your pieces out, bishop e3 or f4, maybe move the knight somewhere, or start this c3 plan and bring the knight back. That's also a good idea. So I wasn't quite sure what to do against g4, and I know from other Scandinavian games I've played that one of the main ideas is to exchange queens off so white has less attacking chances on the king side. So that's why I played queen d5. And it's very hard to stop the exchange of queens. I was briefly thinking through the game, well, can white get away with playing queen b3 and giving up the rook, something along these lines? And I wasn't entirely sure whether this is a good idea or not. Maybe I can trap the queen in some way. But again, it's not strictly necessary, but back here, here, and then look to castle. I think black's doing okay. And we just essentially exchange rooks, the queen's slightly out of play. But if I didn't like this line, I could also take on here, which is not ideal because it allows the rook to come into the game, but I thought this is a perfectly normal opening position. So I had that idea in mind, but he played bishop g2 instead, and I thought, well, I can just exchange the queens off, why not? And again, I've got this idea, this bishop, again, is just attacking a very well structured position, and he's made a few weaknesses on this side. So this f4 square and h4 square will be weak for the rest of the game, and that's something I exploited when we looked about 15-20 moves on. So I develop my pieces normally, so knight b d7 seems normal. Eventually I may want to get in e5 or c5, but the key thing is not to rush those kind of ideas. Just get your pieces out, get castles. That's what I tell all my chess students. Just develop your pieces first before doing anything else, which is essentially what we did. My opponent played g5, which seems a reasonable move. Just kick the knight around. But my knight tends to want to come to this square anyway, which is what I did. And then I analysed the ramifications of an early c4. That's the thing I have to watch out for. But after c4, if white plays this, I was toying between what I played later on, which is bring my knight back into this lovely f5 square. Now the pawn is not defending that square. Or possibly play knight b4. So after knight b4, I'm threatening a fork. And I'm also threatening to win the bishop pair back as well. So I have like a tactical threat and a positional threat. And I thought this would probably cause problems. Could just castle to avoid those kind of problems. And then I was just thinking, is this worth it for me or not? I don't know. I can see my knight getting trapped in a few variations. Something along the lines of knight c2. Rook b1, bishop b4 is coming, where is this knight going, exactly. So I wasn't entirely sure if knight b4 was the right idea, but at the very least I can bring my knight back to here and bring it to a lovely f5 square, attacking the overextended pawn. So I had that idea on the radar as well. My opponent just castled, which seems sensible. Don't have to clarify these things. And then I just get my pieces out. Bishop d6, stopping bishop f4, which is the natural square for the bishop to come to. And now my opponent did play c4, and because of the knight b4 thing not working, I brought my knight back to here, and my knights have got nice squares to come into. There's a few weaknesses on the king side. I'm not going to checkmate white, but certainly I can put some pressure. So my opponent plays b3, logical, bring this bishop to the long diagonal, particularly if he can get the rooks behind, which is what he did, and play a quick d5, which is the main plan against black. I castled, bishop b2, and then I just centralise my rooks. Again, no rush to play something like e5. I want to get all my pieces involved first. So, rook fe8, rook a d1, good move, rook a d8, and this is where my opponent started to use up quite a bit of time, because, I don't know, white's probably got a slight edge because of the two bishops, but you could argue I've got some weaknesses here for my knights to attack as well. If white can't get in d5 and try and open up the position for the bishops, then I'm doing rather well. But it was interesting to see what white came up with. I thought a possibility could be knight c3, rook e1. One of those positions where white has so many different candidate moves that you kind of have to react to what they're doing and think about your plans as well. So my opponent played bishop g4, which is interesting. It stops my knight coming to h5 because I'd have to double my pawns, or at least think about that kind of threat. Again, this idea of d5, if takes, maybe can upset my coordination by taking on d7 certainly. And I was trying to calculate through some of these without moving the bishop, but it seemed like white got quite a bit of pressure. So I just move a bishop back. Bishops are long-range pieces, they don't necessarily need to be in the centre of the board. It's still got this lovely diagonal here, and if rook fe1, maybe I can do an irritating bishop a5 as well. So I calculated that d5 will not work in this position. I can simply take and also play knight e5, attacking here. So I didn't think that was working. King g2, logical. There's no queens on the board, so the king is perfectly safe coming up. Now I play this very interesting idea of knight f8. And my simple idea is to attack these weakened dark squares. Notice this bishop is right on the side of the board, which means it has, at the moment, no control over any of these dark squares here. So look at where your opponent's pieces are and try and attack where the pieces aren't, so to speak. And my idea is to bring the knights into these two lovely squares, which is what I end up doing. White plays rook d3, looking to double the rooks. I play knight g6, looking at those dark squares as I labelled earlier, and then doubled up there. And I thought I'd take the opportunity to try and probe on these weaknesses here, try and bring them forward, and then I can start attacking. So with this in mind, I played knight f4, which, because I'm forking the rook and the king, he has to take, like so. And I thought the only way he can defend the pawn is by playing h4, which is what he played in the game, or playing the weaker bishop c1. And I was perfectly happy if this happened, because after takes, I get that ideal situation I talked about, which is I've got a knight against the bishop is hitting pawns that are well defended and on the same colour as the bishop, and I thought I was perfectly fine here. I could even think about playing e5 immediately, or c5. I could even then play knight here as well, looking for the fork. E5 is interesting too. Yeah, he's just got some ideas in the position, maybe not quite that good after the rook here, possibly. I don't really want to exchange things off because something comes into d7. Maybe then I can play knights here. I've still got this fork idea. That might be a little tricky to handle. Rook back here. Can even play e4. It's double-edged because this pawn could become weak as well. There's certainly some good ideas in the position, but he played what I thought he would, which is he wants to keep the bishop there and wants to play h4. And so I try and get these pawns down the board by playing knight g6, so simply attacking the pawn. And I thought after h5, I've got a couple of choices here. I could play the knight back, or I could play a much more simple move and just play knight h4. The king can't come to these two squares, say king h3 for example. I thought I could just maybe take the pawn and be a pawn up. And okay, still got the two bishops. I might have to double my pawns with knight f5, but a pawn is a pawn. I've got a solid position. It's something to work with at the very least. So yeah, h5 looks a bit loose, which is why my opponent brought this rook across to h3. And we have this situation of split rooks, which can sometimes be exploited. Yeah, I can get my other pieces in. I play bishop back to c7, so renewing this fork threat on these two pieces. He plays his rook back to h1, reconnecting those rooks, which is a good idea. And I thought for quite a while here on how to progress, and I thought now was the time to try and play e5. And the reason is this rook is not on this file. I thought I've got a little tiny bit of time to try and exchange the bishops off. This was my plan. So I played e5. He could possibly think about d5 as well, but this after takes, and here this pawn would then drop, although he might have bishop f3 and pick up b7, but his king would be more vulnerable than mine. This rook could then come to e2, attacking here and here. Let's have a look at some of those variations. I'm not saying this is what my opponent would have done. Say king f3, maybe not king f3, maybe, it's tricky actually, because after king f3, I can probably just take. What with is an interesting question. Because after knight takes, it has no good square to go to, arguably. If I take with the rook, after this rook is coming into d7, which is a problem. Knight b6, I'm still a pawn up. There's no easy entry squares for the pieces. The king is more active, but again, a pawn is a pawn, and if it's black you can get a pawn up and keep a reasonably solid position. It puts pressure on white to try and come up with something. And my opponent was getting short on time as well, so my time management was pretty good in this game. It got better as the tournament went on, but certainly I tried to put some pressure on. But I imagine my opponent thought, okay, d5, I could lose a pawn. It looks like I'm losing a pawn. I'd have to be very precise to get the counterplay back, so why not just take it instead? I took with the bishop because I'd love to exchange these bishops off. Then I get that ideal scenario of knight versus light squared bishop with my pawns on light squares. So that's why he played bishop c1. It was a good move. A sign of strength from my opponent, who wants to keep the bishop pair and see if he can just keep probing at my weaknesses and see if he can do something with it. I took this opportunity to take on here. I mean, I spent quite a bit of my time calculating rook takes rather than what my opponent played as bishop takes. Now, rook takes has the idea of a pawn sacrifice because this pawn is hanging with check. But say after king h3, for example, my knight has to come back, then my rook to here, my opponent's rook to there, and yeah, I'm probably in for some passive defense here. I might just have to play super solid, play rook b8, which is not ideal. And even though I'm a pawn up, he has the two bishops, he's got the active rook, good bishop on g4, active king. I thought my opponent would go for this and go for active counterplay against sacrificing the pawn. But hard to do when you're short of time. I do understand that. So he played instead bishop takes d1, which, yeah, I mean, he doesn't lose a pawn, that's true, but my pieces do stay active in the middle. I play rook d8. Threatening taking here and taking here, based on the previous tactic we've seen, bishop c2, and then I decide to try and bring the king into the open. I'm not sure if it's the best idea. What I really want to do is exchange the bishops off, but the problem with this line, bishop f4, is after bishop takes, there is a desperado move of taking one of the pawns, and I end up a pawn down in this kind of position. Now, yeah, why be a pawn down? I do want to exchange bishops off, but not if I lose a pawn. So, instead of playing bishop there, maybe there's an improvement I could make here. I was getting short on time at this point, move 29. I play knight f4 check and try to bring my knight to a more stable square. Still seems reasonable in hindsight. And the problem is these bishops cover all the entry squares from my rook, so it's hard to get into position. So play knight f4, doesn't want to exchange, king f3, knight e6, threatening a cheeky fork on here, which would fork those two pieces. Of course my opponent is strong, not going to fall for things like that. Bishop e4, which seems logical, and yeah, at this point I wasn't entirely sure how to proceed. Those bishops do control a lot of territory. Again, the assessment of position, I would probably say slightly better for white, I guess, because these are not, there's not many weaknesses now around the king. I can't really get at the king either. Because I could play a check, for example, here, knight d4, but what am I really achieving? Where is this knight going exactly? This is not a particularly stable square. If I play c5, would take on b7. So yeah, I wasn't entirely sure, and so I played what I thought was quite a logical move. I played g6. So have a think for 5 seconds. Why do you think I played g6? There's two main reasons. Okay, well, two reasons are as follows. First, to get some room, some luft for my king, so my king can always come up to here. And again, I'm following that strategy I talked about earlier. Look at all these pawns. They are all on, apart from this one, light squares. So really trying to restrict this bishop and giving maximum room to my bishop. So this is a constant idea in the position. Maybe in the future as well, this gives me the opportunity to bring my knight around to f5 as well. Let's continue. So bishop e3. Again, I'm keen to try and exchange off these dark square bishops. So play bishop here. Notice after something like this, my opponent didn't play this, but after something along these lines, so take, probably king takes, I guess. I get this ideal position where I'll bring my king into the center, so here, here, and here, and then slowly I'll try and attack these weaknesses with my very flexible knight. And this bishop is restricted by all these pawns. I was hoping for something along these lines, but again, opponent's strong to see that idea and plays bishop c1, just keeping the bishop pair. It's a real battle between trying to exchange the bishops and my opponent keeping them. And so I play bishop e5, this seems reasonable, and then king g4. And I saw king g4 and I thought, now I've got an opportunity of pinning this piece here, yeah, at least slightly uncomfortably. And I'm getting short of time, I wasn't sure if there was something else I could try here, because I want to keep the rook file open. So, and the problem with something like knight c5, if I can play it here, is after something along these lines, bishop c2. Again, I'm not really getting into white's position. This is the kind of problem. So, okay, it's reasonably balanced, but white's always got this nagging edge, which is something that comes with this particular line. So I try to be a bit more direct here and play rook d4, so exploiting the pin along here. My opponent played rook e1, centralised, protected, and I played knight c5, trying to exchange off bishop for knight. It'll give me a different kind of ending, a same bishop ending, and we'll see later on actually how that unfolded. So play king f3, yeah, and then I took on e4, which is a rush decision in hindsight. Maybe I should just try and do it on my terms, if that makes sense. But I was a little bit scared of something like bishop e3, although rook takes is fine. So actually, or bishop e2. Yeah, bishop b2 is probably the threat here. So I want to play something like king f8, just bringing my king closer to the centre. After bishop b2, do I have a way out of this? Because I could get this kind of ending. I've got to take here. I can't take this bishop because this hangs. It takes here. I could try and go into this kind of ending, which would be interesting. Or alternatively, that's just losing. So yeah, I was a little bit nervous of bishop b2 and the ramifications of that, going to that kind of ending. And that's why I exchanged off immediately. Yeah, looking at this in hindsight, I probably should just retreat back somewhere. I have to be careful because this bishop is loose as well. So after something like, yeah, rook. So instead of playing king f8, rook here. I've got to be careful of discoveries. So something like bishop g6, attacking here, using the rook. So yeah, maybe I shouldn't have gone into this whole rook d4, knight c5 thing. But because I then basically exchange everything on e4, which gives me this, I would say, worse ending. This king is so active, this is the problem. However, it is hard to get into my position, and it does give me time to try and come into the centre eventually. So I play bishop c3, making sure that these squares are guarded and the king can't advance in. Yeah, white had a little something here, certainly. Played a6, so I want these pawns opposite my bishop to have this same bishop ending. Bishop d4. Notice, by the way, I can't exchange bishops. That would be terrible. Don't even know how black would try and defend this. Let's just say, arguments say f5. Takes up en passant. The problem is this king can come in and eat these pawns up, and then this pawn promotes, and I don't think I'll be quick enough. One way to help you calculate these kind of things is actually count. So if I counted for me, for example, in order to try and promote a pawn on the H file, probably the quickest way, there's other ways of doing it, is to play H5. So 1, 2, capture, capture, so that stays at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's going to take at least 6 moves to do that, and my opponent might even have a f4 to stop that plan as well. Or if my opponent has 1, let's do it again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it would maybe take a little bit longer, but if I played, it's white's move anyway, here, my opponent might just try and play this. This would hold up my play significantly. I'm going from black side. Let's go 1, 2, 3. So 3 to the push, 4, 5, 6, 7. That time 1, 2, 3. And that would actually be quicker. So one of those endings where it looks like white is going to win that if the bishop comes off, in my personal opinion. So I had to keep the bishops on, so bishop a5. And I was a little bit worried, my opponent played bishop c5 to try and restrict my king from coming out here. I was a bit worried about king here, certainly initially. And I was thinking how to defend against this, but I think bishop c7 does the trick. Because the only forward square this king can come to is f6. And then at the very least I can get a draw by just constantly checking. And if it goes backwards like this, then I should be able to sneak out the king. If I check like this, for example, and I'm going to get to a light square on e6 eventually. So you can see why my opponent played that, c5, try and limit that scope of my king. So I played instead bishop c3 with the idea of playing f5, and if taking en passant I can take back with the bishop. That was my idea. If, by the way, white plays bishop d4, well, we get a repetition essentially after bishop a5. So white's making no progress. So my opponent played b4, try and create some weaknesses on this side, because if white can somehow get this in and break up the pawns, maybe this white king can target b7 right at the end. I played my plan of f5, and I thought that my opponent would just come back basically. They're both fairly short of time, because can't go forward, maybe something like, yeah, king d3 for example, and then I bring my bishop probably to e5 and then march my king into the centre, and it's essentially a draw. I don't think it's very easy for either side to make much progress. But my opponent, I don't know what my opponent was thinking about particularly, took en passant. And I saw this move and I was like, okay, you can take en passant, that's very nice. But I'm constantly attacking this pawn. And the thing is, it's very hard to protect the pawn. If he pushes and tries to jettison it, well, I'll get two outside pass pawns. That's not a good thing. For white, I can try and promote those fairly easily. Yeah, I was a bit baffled by this move. I thought maybe white could play something like bishop d6 and come back to g3. And if I do go after this pawn, well, yeah, the problem is this f2 pawn is hanging as well. So this could be tricky. Maybe something like f4, possibly. The problem is I now have this outside passed pawn, which in an opposite coloured bishop ending is not much of a concern. You can blockade it, but in the same bishop ending, that can certainly make a difference. So yeah, I was very confused by just taking the pawn and not just retreating. My opponent played a4, and I probably could take this pawn straight away, but there's no easy way for white to defend. So again, in endgames you don't rush. I bring my king to the centre, king f6, and make sure I've always got this king e6 idea on tap, so to speak. My opponent then just played this, looking to protect the pawn, and now I took the opportunity to take it, because if the king tries to march up, well, at the very least I can play bishop e7, and that stops the king going any further. Can't take, by the way, because I've got these outside passed pawns, and that will simply win. There's no way, if the king does try and stop those pawns, then I get time to eat up these pawns over here. So can't afford to exchange bishops. It's always a careful thing. If you do exchange your last minor piece, you have to be aware if the king and pawn ending is winning or not, and you have to be very, very sure whether it's winning for you. If it isn't, well, better just to keep the pieces on. My opponent played b5. The key thing, by the way, is to take the c pawn. You want to be a bit careful because of breakthrough ideas. It doesn't work in this case, I don't think, with these kind of things. But in this case it isn't, but just as a good habit, I took with the c pawn. And we just exchange all those pawns off. And I pawn up in this ending. Yeah, my king is going to get centralised, certainly. And I do have an outside passed pawn. And over the next few moves, I just play very naturally. So I bring my king to the centre, very important. Okay, so I'm sort of eyeing this side of the board as well as the other. There's no need to play king f6, for example. King e4. And now I just push my passed pawn. Passed pawns must be pushed. Plays f4. I play bishop e1, looking to clear the lines, so this can go all the way down the board. Bishop g1, h4, bishop h2. I wanted to play this move, because if bishop comes back here, then I can play here, and I'm going to win his bishop, and with that the game. Unfortunately, I say this, you always have to calculate these king and pawn endings. After takes king here, I don't get time to take this pawn. This is the problem. So after g2, trying to distract the white king. Come here and here, and again, I don't know whether this is a draw or not, or even a white win, but yeah, why risk this when you can just keep the bishops on? So instead of looking for that idea, I just kept pushing. So played h3, king plays it back to f3, and now I have this great blockade. The king can't go to any of these squares, which is really, really nice. So it keeps constant pressure on. If bishop g3, by the way, trying to break that idea, well, now this is winning. So after taking h2, here, this is a win. So again, couldn't play bishop g3, which would be a move I want to play. So I played back to g1, and I played to h4. And I just repeated the position just a couple of times, and there's no reason why not to do that. Yeah, it's not going to change whether the position is winning or not, and it just tells the opponent who's boss, even to an international master. So no reason to hurry particularly, and I was trying to build up some time on the clock so I could really think about the position. And so I thought of trying going after the f4 pawn. After a little bit of moving. But I got to this position, and I saw obviously that after bishop here, I play bishop g3, and I'm not really achieving much. I'm not making any progress. So I had to revisit my plan, and my idea was to exchange pawns, which generally you don't want to do, but it does allow my king to get better into position. So h2, king g2 forced, must stop the pawn from promoting. Then I take on here, I get my king to this very nice square f3. It can't be attacked by the bishop, and now I get in g5, g4 without any problems from white, because my bishop can come to e7, supporting the pawn upwards. So after bishop here, I can insert the check in, forcing the king to a worse square. If h3, by the way, then I get an extra move with my pawn with tempo. King h1, and I just move the pawn. Keep moving the pawn. Very straightforward. Why did I play across to h3? I'm wondering why I didn't play g3 immediately. It probably wins as well. Okay. Say white doesn't do anything. Check has to come to here. Yeah, I couldn't see an easy way to make progress at this point here. I think it's because I would like to play bishop h2 supported by the king, which forces then the king out of where it is. But my king can't do this from f3. It has to be on h3 in order to have that idea up my sleeve, so to speak. So I used the opportunity to transfer my king across to h3, and then my opponent played a nice stalemate trick with bishop c5. The problem with bishop c5, by the way, is if I take it, free bishop, that's nice. This is actually a draw, because the king has nowhere to move. Can't move here, here, or here. The pawn can't move, but I'm not checking the enemy king, which means it's stalemate and a draw, Pat in German. So, a nice little tricky stalemate trick. But again, I'm not forced to take the bishop, so I play bishop here. And notice that now white can't play the same trick with bishop a7 because this pawn's in the way. So that was a nice idea. Then what does my opponent do? I'm threatening just to play g4, g2, and then play my bishop to a2, digging out the king. So my opponent played king g1, and then this leads to a nice forcing sequence for me. Bishop h2, if king h1, then g3, and he can't stop g2 checkmate, which is nice. So he played to the only other square, which is f1. We go to, I still play g3 anyway, and simply the same idea of g2 and promotes. Notice if I exchange the pawn for the bishop, I'll have time to then pick up this pawn, and because it's not a corner pawn, I can promote it on a light square. I may actually go through that if I can get the variation. So he played bishop g1, which loses immediately. Seems a good idea, but I calculated this, that I can simply take it and then play my pawn here. I knew this was a winning king and pawn ending because white has to move. This can't move. The only square this can move to is here, and then I can silently move my king up the board, rook to a queen, and this is an easy win after promoting to a queen. Just to show you that other variation, so just wondering how I'm going to do this. So king g1. Let's I just need to get the king out of there first. Yeah, so if, say, king f1 and then just pushes the pawn, say the king runs for it, this is not the only way to win, but if king here, I can actually promote the pawn. I can sacrifice the bishop for it. The king is not quite in time to get and protect the pawn. Notice there's, after king b5, bishop c7, this lovely blockade where the king can't approach the pawn. So if I play some moves quickly, like this, slowly but surely I will make progress up the board. There are different ways of doing this, but I'll quickly get to the end position. Almost there. Right, to move. Say bishop here. Have to be careful of stalemates here. And this will promote. But notice if just want to try and get to the right position here. You get this kind of position. With the idea of stalemate, by the way. So usually if the bishop wasn't here, then this would be stalemate, but I can simply make any move with the bishop and it forces then the king here, and then I can get the promotion in and get the queen. So that doesn't work, that trick, if the pawn is on going to this square, but it's okay if it's any of these squares here. So some interesting endgame ideas towards the end as well. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed the game. What I'm going to do now, hopefully, if I can find the button, because I'm now going to press the analysis button and see if there's anything that can be improved upon. Both anonymous, that's very nice. Points to take away from this game. I'm not sure how it's analysing this. I was doing it from the start. I'll do it from the end. Points to take away from the game. So I knew my opening plan, or one of my opening plans very well, which is to exchange your bishop for knight, but then put those pawns on light squares. When you come across an unfamiliar idea, so in this case the idea of g4, again, think of the typical plans that happen in position anyway, and then see if they work, and don't be afraid to analyse a lot of different candidate moves. Next, when you go into the middle game, try and give yourself enough time. So one thing I did towards the end of the tournament, because it's only an hour and a half for all moves plus a 30-second increment, so 30 seconds extra per move, is to make sure you have enough time for the whole game. Seems kind of obvious, but if you calculate it, 90 minutes, you even give yourself 5 minutes a move, that's only 18 moves, even with the extra increment. So you don't really want to give yourself much longer than 5 minutes or even 3 or 4 minutes, even if you do know quite a lot of opening theory. So you don't really want to do that unless you strictly have to. But try and work out when those critical moments are. Certainly for me, I think it was that position where I played rook d4 in the centre. I don't think it's the right idea, but again, I tried to think about it quite a bit and see what to do. But those two bishops were certainly quite irritating. And essentially my opponent blundered in the endgame to give myself I imagine it was a winning endgame anyway, even with best defence by white. I think it's, yeah, still winning. So let's just have a look through as it's analysing. So it said, yeah, that this is an inaccuracy, and the best move was h4 in the position. Interesting. So instead of castling, h4. There's no need to castle straight away. And then black plays bishop d6, castles queenside. Certainly an idea. It plays a similar kind of idea I played, which is knight e7, trying to exploit the weakened light squares. Okay, that's interesting. And the computer thinks I should play h6 immediately. To open up the h file and castle queenside. Yeah, that's certainly an interesting idea. Because after takes and takes, for example, or even g6 actually, yeah, g6 is stronger, and take with the bishop, I'm getting some free pressure basically against h3, and then look to castle. Yeah, that's certainly a good idea. Exploit the slightly open king, even if there are no queens on the board. Certainly interesting. Okay. Okay, it's still trying to chew through quite a bit of position. That's an interesting opening idea, to play h6 and then work through it from there. Okay, well, I'm not too worried about the computer analysis. I like going through it by myself, and then I'll be checking the computer analysis later. But hopefully it gives you a few ideas on how to take down an international master. So stay solid, know your plans, know what you're looking to achieve. So I was looking to try and exploit these weak squares and nullify the bishop pair. Didn't quite do that, exchanged into an ending that probably put me under a bit of pressure, but probably still equal, and then made the blunder. So keeping up on time, just keeping pressure on the opponent, particularly if they're higher rated than you. You know, they're looking to win the game, and sometimes just being solid and just parrying the threats and sticking to your plans can be quite a bit of pressure for a higher rated player. Sometimes against a lower rated player you have to play a little bit differently, but I like to build my chess play on solid foundations. It's the way I like to try and play chess. Okay, hope you found that interesting. I will put a mini video together on a good list of tips on how to improve at chess. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and see you next time. Bye bye.